Hello everyone. Today we'll begin with how the Mesopotamians attributed every natural disaster to divine will, usually as punishment. The Mesopotamians believed that dreams, omens, and snakes were all tools of the gods. In Babylon, where floods from the Euphrates River were frequent, the people living near the river suffered the most. Resettlement areas after disasters in Babylonian times were organized by family clans or professions. After floods, the Babylonian government rebuilt houses with baked bricks, this time farther from the river. Before we start, if you genuinely find this a cozy place to take shelter late at night, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly want to. No pressure. Like the rule in old taverns. Only if you need a quiet place. Before we start, if you genuinely find this a cozy place to take shelter late at night, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly want to. No pressure. Like the rule in old taverns. Only if you need a quiet place. And do you know what I love most? It's scrolling through the comments, seeing where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 a.m. or 5 a.m., you're still here, and I see you. Now turn off the lights. Maybe turn on a little fan if you have one, not because it's hot, but for that soft buzzing sound. You don't wake up to a rooster crowing, not to the gentle sunlight sneaking through the door crack. You wake up because a blast of freezing water smacks you straight in the face. You blink, trying to rewire your nervous system. The mat you slept on, instead of wrapping around your body, is now floating like a paper raft on the Euphrates. Water fills the house up to your waist, sloshing into every corner, creeping through every crack in the mud walls, now eroded by the rain. Cold shoots down your spine, soaking through the thin layers of cloth you're wearing. Your legs tremble from the icy water, like 100 tiny needles piercing your skin. The floor is slick and muddy, grabbing your feet with every step, making it feel like you're trudging through a swamp inside your own home. You look around, chaos everywhere. The family altar where you used to place incense sticks is tilting with the tiny waves. Your chicken named Happiness is sitting proudly atop the statue of Marduk, eyes saying, "So, what now, genius?" Your mum is trying to hold onto the rickety bed that, you swear, already broke once last year. You spot some familiar floating items, the left sandal you couldn't find last week, or that old chamber pot you thought nobody used. They drift past like mocking reminders of how little control you have right now. You remember your grandmother's words. The family altar must be steady, like our family. Now, it sways like a little boat in a hurricane, and all you can do is laugh bitterly at that golden advice. Suddenly, you hear the voice of your elderly neighbor shouting up at the rainy sky, "Enlil, we already offered all our wheat. What more do you want?" A cry of desperation laced with bitter humor. Then it hits you, the old story from the temple of Marduk that the priest told during festivals. Enlil's wrath comes when humans forget sacred offerings, forget their reverence. And now, that story feels more real than ever, as you and your neighbors are neck deep in divine anger you never asked for. You wonder, Did Babylon commit some unforgivable sin? Or did the gods just wake up on the wrong side of bed during a thunderstorm? Within minutes, the home you once called shelter has become a pond. You want to scream, but the water gets in your mouth. So instead, you scoff. Fine. If you're soaked, might as well go all in. Outside, shouting, people running, furniture banging, water slamming against the city wall. You know instantly, this isn't just rain. Enlil, god of wind and storms, is angry. And Babylon, your city, is being tested. You wade through the water, step by slow step. Your feet slip across the soaked ground. You try holding onto a pillar, but it's just a muddy, wet wooden beam. Feels like walking on water without a boat. You can't just sit still. Your mother is screaming, waving to neighbors. You're dragging along Happiness, the chicken who won't stay quiet and keeps squawking like a living alarm. Now you understand. Today, you won't be working. You won't be eating bread. You won't be thinking about tomorrow. You have only one job: survive. And so the story begins, in floodwater, soaked mud, and with people who suddenly have no home left to return to. You don't know what this feeling is called. Maybe it's panic, maybe it's despair, or maybe it's just wanting to ask again. Why is my chicken standing on the altar? Standing in the flooded house, you stare at the chicken named Happiness with a mix of blame and admiration. It sits there, comfortably on the statue of Marduk, eyes calm and fearless. It shakes its wet feathers, and a few drops splash onto the statue of Marduk as if taunting it. You stare closely at the statue of Marduk, made of baked clay, its stern face worn down by time, yet still holding its majestic presence. You wonder if the god is looking at you, or just concerned about the chicken perched on his head. You remember the first day you brought the chicken home, naming it Happiness, with the hope it would bring luck to the whole family. Once, it ran around the house so fast you couldn't catch it. Another time, it screamed loud enough to save you from a surprise hailstorm. Now, the name Happiness sounds bitterly ironic as your entire house swims in floodwater. You silently ask, are you really trying to save me? Or are you just waiting to see when I'll drown? Happiness. Your mother is still struggling to hold onto the rickety bed. Her face shows the full spectrum of emotions: regret, heartbreak, and a painful hesitation before letting go. Her eyes seem to want to hold on to every memory of a life already slipping away. She sighs and says, voice heavy with sadness and a trace of exhausted humor, "This bed's as stubborn as your father was. Never got fixed its whole life." Well then, let it float away. You glance back at the altar again and suddenly let out a bitter laugh. Even now, the statue of Marduk wears that strangely calm expression, as if saying, "Don't worry, I see everything. It's just that I'm not planning to do anything about it." Outside, through the slightly open door, you see the chaos unfolding. Floodwater carries away furniture. Voices shout and echo through the narrow street. Someone's trying to save an old ceramic vase, screaming in desperation, "Oh no, my cow just floated away." A child sits on the neighbor's rooftop, eyes gazing into the distance, unsure of what tomorrow holds. You hear the old neighbor curse and laugh at the same time. Damn it, if the sky acts up like this, how can the earth stay still? You take a deep breath, gather all your courage, and walk toward the statue of the god to once again grab the chicken. This time, happiness looks at you with a face of surrender, as if it accepts that it can't stay on the altar forever during a flood of biblical proportions. The chicken fits snugly in your arms, but your heart doesn't. It still pounds, beating like the emergency drums of Babylon sinking slowly into water. You take one last look at your home, the shaky altar, the crooked bed, and your grandmother's voice still echoing somewhere in your mind. But now, you have only one thought: how to get your mother and a chicken named Happiness safely to the Babylonian city wall, the only place people believe the water won't reach. Your footsteps are slow, struggling to stay balanced in the angry current. The chicken makes soft clucking sounds in your arms, like a tiny voice of encouragement amid the fury of the gods. Today, you're not a hero. You're just someone trying to hold on to what's left, whether that's your mother, a chicken, or a little bit of faith in the god still sitting quietly on the altar. And the story isn't over yet. It's only just beginning. You know, escaping a flood in Babylon isn't easy. Running is one thing, but running barefoot through mud, sharp rocks, and broken bricks, well, good luck becoming a barefoot wanderer in the El and of the gods. In ancient Babylon, shoes weren't just things you wore. A good pair of shoes was a prized possession, the final shield of a working-class family. The rich wore fancy leather shoes with designs as beautiful as legends. The poor, they just prayed for a simple pair of straw sandals to keep the mud out, or at least stop it from slipping between their toes. When news of flooding came, people tied shoes to ceiling beams, hid them in jars, strapped them to rafts, each pair a lucky charm for its owner. You remember how your father always said, again and again, floods may wash away our wheat, but never let them take your shoes. If your shoes survive, you survive. That line now beats inside your head like a war drum. And honestly, if your shoes got washed away right now, you'd cry harder than your mum. The flood is crashing down, swallowing the whole street. You look at your soaked feet, covered in mud, scratched up from those old torn shoes, and you wonder, will these shoes even survive till the end of the road? Right now, your shoes are your armor. They protect you from gravel, from thorns, even from water snakes hiding in the mud. Without them, you, a so-called civilized person in the GR and city of Babylon, would just be a fish flopping in the dirt, with no dignity left. You remember when they were brand new. Your mum used to scrub every bit of leather, every thread. Now they're cracked, torn, and every step on sharp stone feels like a trial. You can't even imagine taking them off in the middle of a flood, barefoot in Babylon. Oh no. No one wants their life to end with trench foot. Your mum glances over, eyes filled with both worry and a strange flicker of pride. She sighs and says softly, her voice part serious, part joking, "Remember, our shoes are family treasure. They came from your grandpa, Your dad used to say, floods may wash away wheat, but never let them take your shoes. You chuckle, trying to reassure her. Yes, Mom. If my shoes get swept away, I'll just run barefoot to Enlil and get it over with. She tightens her lips, gives you a look, then lets out a tired laugh. If you dare, the gods won't need to punish you. I'll do it first. The story is both funny and warm. Amid the flood, it's family tradition, and your mum's love that gives strength to every step. Water pours in, rushing through every crack, sweeping away anything not nailed down. You hear wooden doors breaking loose, rats squealing in corners, people shouting outside. You run toward the city wall, gripping every wooden plank. Each step is a silent battle. And those shoes, even if torn, keep you from falling inside your own home. You gasp for air, your heart pounding like emergency drums in the night. Cold water seeps through every stitch of your shoes, into your skin. But you run. You run because your mom is stumbling behind you. You run because a child is gripping your hand tightly. You run because you believe that wall is the last safe place. You don't know how far you'll go. You don't know what the future holds. But you know one thing. If you lose those shoes, you'll lose yourself in the wild floodwaters of Babylon. So you keep running, rain or not, flood or not. You run like each step is a challenge hurled at the gods themselves. Your shoes may tear, but your will won't. You reach the shelter, or more accurately, a mess of people, water, and air thick with the smell of silent surrender. The temporary camp outside the city wall isn't what you'd expect from a camp. There are no tents, no fires, no order, just people waiting and water pooling under their bodies. Some rushed up wooden poles were thrown together. Palm leaves were tossed over them like that would somehow make the rain fall softer. You're not sure if you're taking shelter from the rain or attending a ritual meant to wash away the nation's last hopes. Each drop on your forehead whispers, Babylon doesn't offer home insurance. A child cries. An old woman groans from water-soaked joints. A man sits frozen, clutching an old window frame, the only thing he saved. Someone tries to start a fire with a bit of charcoal from their coat pocket, but the rain snuffs out both hope and skill. All that's left is the hiss of wet socks steaming. An elderly woman mutters, "Looks like Godadad's cooking stew." No one laughs, but someone shivers. Maybe they laughed, just a little. Someone fights over a soggy piece of bread. No one knows who dropped it, but everyone stares like it's edible fate. You slump down next to your mother. She coughs. The kid still grips your hand, half asleep. Thunder swearing in the sky above. You tilt your face upward, rain hitting your eyes. Tears or rain, you can't tell anymore. You were in a camp like this once, 10 years ago, after another flood. Back then, you were small, sleeping in a rotting onion basket. Your mother padded it with banana leaves, covered you with a worn cloth printed with the Lion of Ishtar. Now you're here again. Older, colder, and realizing that floods never truly leave your life. You once thought if you could just survive the waters, everything would be okay. But it turns out, what kills you in the end isn't water, It's the cold, the damp, and the feeling of being left behind. A young stranger beside you looks at your soaked shoes and mutters, "At least you have shoes. All I got are 2 feet and 3 blisters." You laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's the first human-sounding thing you've heard in hours. In Babylon, after every flood, they build camps like these, not to save anyone, but to gather all the despair into one place. Easier to manage that way. Before night falls, a group starts scooping rainwater into a helmet, adds wilted greens, a muddy onion, stirs with a stick. Someone calls it Royal Edition Survival Soup. Someone else replies, "Just missing the throne and some dragons at our feet." Then silence. Because empty stomachs growl louder than jokes. Night falls. Rain keeps falling. You curl up next to your mum and the child. A soaking wet dog walks into the shredded tent, shakes itself, making everyone flinch. It doesn't bark, just lies down in the circle of humans, as if it too has the right to take shelter. You don't push it away, because deep down you know, on a night like this, everyone needs another body nearby to feel like they're still alive. All around you are people who have nothing left except hope and the sound of empty bellies. You whisper, "If the rain stops tomorrow, I'll find some bricks, rebuild the house, or at least somewhere to hang my shoes." And believe it or not, on that rainy night, a lost rooster wandered past you. It was soaked like you, but still raised its head and let out a weak crow. And you told yourself, if it still dares to crow, I still dare to live. The next morning, you wake up in a state where you're not sure if you're still alive. No birdsong, no smell of food, only the smell of damn people, and your stomach growling like a horn summoning hungry gods. You scramble up, tie a cloth bag on your head like a hat. In front of you is a line of people, not sure if they're waiting for bread or waiting to surrender to fate. The person handing out bread doesn't count with their hands. They count with their eyes. The skinnier you are, the bigger the piece. If you still have the strength to argue, you're pushed aside. If you can still talk, you're not that hungry. An old woman holds a bowl of thin porridge, scooping with her and calling it Enlil's wheat soup. Next to her, a man stirs something unidentifiable in a leather hat, rainwater, tree roots, and the belief that it's soup. Someone invented clay tea, basically sucking on wet dirt and swallowing saliva. They call it soul detox. Next to them, a child holds a piece of bread mushy as mud, hands shaking from the cold, but their face glows with a light, like they just bit into hope. You're given a piece of bread, or a brick-shaped bread, still debated. When you try to break it in half, part of it crumbles, and you're left confused whether to eat the rest or rebuild Babylon. A man next to you smirks and says, "Break your tooth on that, and you'll get out of temple construction duty." You're not sure if he's joking or serious, but you take a bite, and it feels like chewing on memory. You sit down, try to eat the bread with the chewiness of clay and the taste of doubt. Even in hunger, Babylonians keep ritual. They sit in circles around a big stone like an imaginary banquet table, sharing with the left H and the right hand for praying. An old man whispers Marduk's name before eating, like he's at a temple feast. Next to you, someone's sucking on a grass root. Nearby, a mother breaks her bread. Most goes to her daughter. The girl bites fast, and the mother just watches, as if staring long enough could fill her up. Her eyes aren't sad, just deep, like she's long accepted giving everything away, even the feeling of being the first to eat. Someone sips rainwater mixed with ashes. Someone silently chews on a rag, not for nutrition, but to keep the mouth busy enough to forget the stomach. The first meal in camp isn't to survive, it's to remind yourself you're still alive. And sometimes, surviving is the bravest act a Babylonian can do the morning after a great flood. From afar comes the sound of footsteps, not hurried, but deliberate, not aid, but the sound of tall leather boots, the kind worn only by those who never go hungry. You look around, soaked, cold, exhausted people, but in their eyes, there's still something. Not hope, not anger, just the most ancient instinct. Find something to put in the stomach. You take another bite. It's hard, dry, and you swear you just heard a chip fall off your molar, but you still swallow. Because if Babylon fell by bricks, then maybe it can be rebuilt from a piece of bread, as hard as brick. That night, the Babylonian refugee camp has no sleep, only wind sneaking through torn tents like fingers poking memories. Only the sound of people shifting and someone whispering. You lie on your side, back pressed to damp ground, stomach growling despite having eaten that bread brick in the morning. Your mother's asleep, or pretending. Your sibling rustles like a bag of onions breathing. And outside, someone starts telling a story, not loudly, just murmurs passed from one mouth to another's ear, the cheapest painkiller in Babylon. Before the first tale even begins, someone almost says something, then stops, not because they forgot, but because that part of the memory is still wet. An old man starts with, once, in the city of Nippur, there was a priest who dared to throw a sandal at the god statue. Soft laughter, a gentle shh, then silence. Then another voice continues, and I used to guard the Isagila temple. Once, I fell asleep, and I saw God Marduk snoozing on his throne too. No one laughs loud. No one claps. But everyone lives again. Even just for a few minutes, even just through a crooked memory, told in a tired voice and dry breath. You listen, not to learn, but to remember. You can still hear. You're not dead. Another child, younger, doesn't tell anything. Instead, they draw circles on the ground with their finger, mumbling like speaking to someone in the sand. No one asks, but everyone hears. A boy around 10 says, "The day before the flood, I raised a turtle. It hid in the water jar. I think maybe it's swimming to Akkad now." No one responds. But in the dark, there's a soft breath, like someone just let go of a dream. Farther away, a man sits apart from the group, alone. Doesn't speak, just stares at the fire as if watching the whole city drown again. Every time someone says washed away, his H and tightens, like trying to hold on to something slipping from his palm. You turn to the strange dog still lying there, among people. It doesn't tell a story, just breathes steady, as if saying, silence is also a way to speak. That night, you don't sleep, but you're not alone either. Because among the mud, torn tents, and empty bellies, Babylonians still tell stories, to keep warm, to count the hours, to make sure that tomorrow there's still someone left to listen. The next morning, you wake up because something cold touches your cheek. Not water, but a stone, a small one, smooth like the whisper of earth. It lies there, in your hand, as if it had rolled around with your dreams all night. You don't remember picking it up, but with a strange instinct, you turn the stone over and carve a name into it, the name of someone lost, or someone you're afraid to lose, or your own name, if tomorrow no one remembers to call you right. You're not the only one. Kids are the quickest imitators and the most creative. One scrawls the name of an onion. Another writes the name of the roasted chicken eaten last night, then covers it with a leaf like a funeral shroud. One even just draws a foot and says it's what's left of my dad. All around, a few others begin doing the same. One elderly woman doesn't write a name. She stacks the stones into the shape of a small roof. She quietly places each one as if rebuilding memories from rubble. When someone asks, she simply says, "So the flood knows we had homes and that we stood upright." Take a stone, carve a name, with a bone shard, with a fingernail, with anything that leaves a mark. No one calls it a ritual. No one gives orders. But that morning, stones with names begin lining up beside the tents, a cemetery where no one died. But everyone is fighting to live. You ask an old woman carving letters, "Whose name is that?" She doesn't look up, just answers, "My cat's. It was the last one to run off, and the one, I believe, will find its way back." By noon, the stones start crowding each other like they're competing for a spot under the sun. One stone suddenly gets flipped. No one sees who did it. On the back, someone has carved, "I'm sorry." No one admits it. But the whole camp goes quiet for a moment, as if each person once had a reason to write that, but couldn't. Some stones have names, some only have question marks. One says, "If someone finds this, please remember I was here." A child shortens the ritual, just writes Mom. No one asks more. No need. You place your stone beside the tent. It doesn't block the rain, it doesn't stop the flood, but it anchors you, keeps your name from being washed out of your own memory. By nightfall, the wind returns, and as the nightly storytelling spreads, someone whispers, "The stone has a name. Me. I'm just dirt." You used to think refugee camps were full of strangers. And at first, yeah, no one knew each other's names. Just that guy, that lady, kid with one shoe, or funny one. But after a few days, you realize there's a kind of familiarity that doesn't need names. It's when you can recognize the cough of the person sleeping beside you. It's when you can tell the porridge from the left side tent smells stronger than yesterday, meaning they're cooking with dried lotus root, not grass. It's when someone doesn't step out in the morning, and you notice a missing silhouette in the rhythm of footsteps. You begin to tell footsteps apart. Even before that, you recognize a dark brown blanket. No one knows where it came from. The first night, an old woman was wrapped in it, coughing hard. The next, it was draped on a feverish young man. Then a rain-soaked child. No one asked. The blanket just moved, as if it knew who needed it, a thing with no name, but everyone had held, at least once. The dragging slippers of an old man, followed by his muttered, "The weather's moulding again today." The hopscotching toddler, still missing one sandal after the flood, and the young woman who always passes by, light, fast, always with the clink of ceramic bowls. People don't need introductions. One afternoon, a bunch of kids started collecting pot lids, roof tiles, straw, then made up a game. No one knew the rules. They just placed objects on the ground, hopped in circles, and shouted things no one could translate. Adults watched, then joined in. One old woman used a spoon as a weapon. An old man played music on a bamboo tube. No one won. No one lost. But for the first time, the whole camp laughed as if there had never been a flood. The only rule was, don't make the littlest kid cry. Under the same sky, sharing the same soup, the same thirst. Strangeness becomes familiarity, and familiarity needs no words. You find yourself sitting with a group, laughing along, even if you don't get the story. That night, the old man from the far tent suddenly starts telling one. No invite, no prompt. He just stands, scratches his head, and says, "I've got a tale. Probably won't put you to sleep." It's an ancient joke, missing a beginning, messed up names, a twisted ending. But the kid laughs first, then the women. Then the whole camp bursts into laughter, even if no one fully understands. From that night on, people wait for him to speak, not for the full story, but to know there's still a human voice. You reach out to steady the porridge pot as it tips, though the person holding it never calls your name. And when someone breaks into tears at noon missing their mother, you sit next to them. No questions, no advice, no actions, just sit. That night, a woman begins telling of a lost son. The story unclear, uncertain ending, voice trembling, hands clutching her shirt. No one interrupts. No Me Too comparisons, just quiet listening. Even if they can't help, people hold each other's memories, as if one remembers, the other hasn't fully disappeared. In a moment of stillness, you hear someone call, "Hey, stonekeeper from yesterday." And you know, they're calling you. Once, a child found a silver bracelet, bent and caked in mud. He held it up and asked, "Whose is this?" No one claimed it. But one by one, they each held it. An old woman said, Looks like my daughter-in-law's, an old man whispered. Maybe. Someone from across the river. A young woman shook her head gently. No, mine didn't have that symbol. No one took it. The bracelet was placed on the central rock, like a name still searching for its owner. And for a whole week, everyone who passed by paused, as if mourning someone they'd never met. Not by name, but by what you did. That's the moment. You're no longer a stranger. The camp is still noisy. Still the slap of footsteps, the bubbling of porridge, someone coughing in the next tent, and arguments over torn mosquito nets. But tonight, no rain. For the first time since the flood arrived, you open your eyes and hear no dripping. No one says anything. Just a shared, quiet glance, as if everyone realizes this silence is a kind of miracle. The young woman on night watch stands outside the tent, still holding an oil lamp that hasn't gone out. She looks up at the sky, then into the camp, hesitates for a few seconds, then turns and walks away softly. No one is woken up, because a night without rain deserves to be slept through. No more wind hissing through the tent seams. No more water overflowing the cooking pot. No more shirt backs sticking to wet mats when lying down. Just a night, with nothing added. You secretly stretch your H and out from under the blanket, touch the edge of the mat. No sound of wet cloth squishing. No splash of pooled water bouncing off your back. Not even the usual rubbing of hands to warm up. It's dry, not exactly warm, but it doesn't make you shiver. And that feeling, light as breath, makes you want to cry a little. Not because you're sad, but because finally, something isn't worse than yesterday. Steady breathing. A child still snores, but this time without the sniffles. An old woman turns over, groans softly, then goes back to sleep, as if her back has been spared for one night. You turn your head, stare at the tent ceiling, patched with all kinds of cloth. Through it, moonlight seeps in, not water. A brass pot, once used to catch drips from the ceiling, is now back by the stove. It sits upside down on the coals, ready to make porridge for the morning. A piece of cloth that once plugged a hole is now folded neatly, placed by the sleeping area like a spare towel. Everything is slowly returning to where it belongs, as if tonight is the first chance to repair the order of this tiny world. No one says anything. But on the other side of the tent wall, you hear someone whisper, "Hey, is your back dry?" "Yeah, I thought I was dreaming." "That's it." Then silence returns. But in your sleep, everyone knows tonight is a turning point, not because things are better, but because at least nothing worse is added. You dream a strange dream. You see a bracelet. It lies in the yard, wet, muddy, but still gleaming with bronze light. No one knows whose it is. It goes from ape and to hand, each person guessing a name. Your daughter's? No. Maybe the kid who likes soccer. In the end, no one claims it. But everyone holds a little belief that its owner will come back, that tomorrow you'll still be here, still the refugee camp, still you, but you'll smile before you sleep, for no reason. And tomorrow morning when you wake, you won't need to check your blanket, because you know tonight is a dry night, and that's enough to start believing. The next morning, you step out of the tent, no longer dodging puddles, because there aren't any, only earth, slightly cracked, soaked in the smell of kitchen ash, human waste, and something very strange, a smell like scales, like old mud, like something slithered through last night, leaving a message without words. You crouch down, a winding trail from the hearth to the edge of your mat, not deep, not clear, but your spine understands immediately. Snake. After the flood, they seek dry places to sleep. And last night, the spot you slept was the driest one. You tell the person next to you. They say nothing. Then an old woman rolls up her sleeve, an old bite, pale, faded, but still there. 2 flood seasons ago, she says. It crawled inside my shirt, thought it was a string. People laugh, not loud, not soft, like it's familiar. You laugh too, even though your gut feels like a stone soaked in ash. After breakfast, plain porridge, no salt, no meat, no hope. A child comes to sit next to you. He points to the tent roof. That patch wasn't there yesterday. You look. Maybe it was. Or you remembered wrong. A young woman looks up too. Wasn't the clothesline red yesterday? You swear it was green. Someone else says yellow. A fourth clearly remembers. There wasn't any line. Everyone's sure they're right, but no one dares insist. A middle-aged man asks the child's name and freezes. He gets it wrong. The child looks at him, doesn't correct him, just turns away, as if it already happened or never did. The unspoken question hangs in the air. If we no longer remember our loved ones' names, are we still ourselves? Evening falls. A skinny old woman sits twisting rope. Her hands are rough, but her voice is soft. My child died last year, but he still returns, every full moon. You listen. Don't ask. Don't argue. Because in the camp, whispers are real. People believe, or they don't, but no one laughs. Also that evening, a girl draws with a stick in the dirt, a snake, curved and winding. She erases it, then draws it again, then erases. On the 3rd try, she looks up. No one is watching her. But she wipes it all away, then walks off. And that night, there is no rain. But you hear something slide past outside the tent. Soft, long, not sure if it's a snake or your own faulty memory. You stay still. Don't move. Only one thought. Not everything disappeared after the flood. Some things just quietly crawled out. You don't remember when you fell asleep. Don't remember who was the last person to talk to you. Don't remember which way you were facing. You only remember that morning. You woke up with your H and gripping a string, not yours. Last night's dream had no images, only sound. The sound of hands knocking on wet wooden doors, bare feet running across slippery tile roofs, someone calling your name but using a different one. You turn your head. A woman is sleeping, curled up like a wet cat. Her hair is full of sand. Her lips are moving. You can't hear her, but she feels familiar, as if she's repeating a phrase you once heard from your own mother's mouth, in a different dream, in a different flood season. Outside, the light is fading, not because of sunset, but because of clouds. A child sits, drawing a roof with their finger in the dirt, then stops. They don't know which way the roof should face. You suddenly crave the smell of smoke from a kitchen, not because you're hungry, but because the smell of smoke means someone is still alive, still cooking, still holding on to something from before. An old man keeps insisting he wants to go home, but no one knows where his home is. When asked, he only points to the sky. There, people laugh, but no one stops him. Night falls. You close your eyes, try to sleep again. This time, the dream is clearer. A dry road, long, with a wooden door standing in the middle of a swampy field. You walk toward it, knock 3 times. No one answers. But a voice in your head says, no one loses their home. It's just that the home is trying to find its person again. You wake up. Sweat clings to your back. The moon is rising, and a breeze flows into the tent. You're no longer afraid, not quite at peace either. You just know, tonight, you will trace the dream with your finger onto the ground before everything drifts away again. You sit, listening to stories tangled in the wind. A man remembers how his hometown had tamarind trees in front of the house. A woman says the place she lived had a river, but the water was salty. A child says their house had a bridge, which was really just 2 rocks close together. You stay silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're not sure what your hometown smelled like. Can't recall the alleyway, can't picture the morning vendor's cry. Only a vague feeling remains, like waking up unsure whether the dream was real or not. You wonder, if I can't remember my hometown, does it still exist? You sit for a long time, say nothing, just quietly pick up a lump of clay, grip it tightly in your hand. As if you're holding onto something that once was yours. You look around, the makeshift tents made from old cloaks, shoelaces, and driftwood stakes. No one in the camp has anything that's truly a home. But each person clings to something, a shard of mirror, a bracelet, a carved piece of wood with a name, as if losing it would make them dissolve into the water that washed everything away. A boy redraws his name in the S, and every morning with a stick. An old woman keeps stitching, and restitching a torn cloth bag, which holds nothing, only because it belonged to my husband. You hear someone singing the lullaby in a language you don't understand, an ancient melody, like it came from an L, and that's no longer on the map. The song is as soft as breath, as water slipping through stone cracks. You don't understand the words, but your heart settles. Maybe home is not a place, but the sound that reminds you you're still alive. You lie down, hugging the clay like a memory that hasn't fully formed. Wind passes through the tent seams, carrying the scent of fresh mud, cold ash, and damp grass. a smell you can't name, but your heart recognizes. You're not sure who first said it. Seems like there's a dry spot up north. You only know. That morning, people began to move, not abandoning the camp, just pushing a few steps further. A slightly raised patch of land, not a hill, not a platform, but at least it didn't sink with every step. And so the internal migration began, like a post-apocalyptic version of the game, first come, first sleep dry. Some carried entire tents, some dragged clay pots, chickens, combs. Some just hugged a bundle of dry ash, with eyes warning no one to come near. That dry spot became the center of rumor. Those who heard early arrived first. Latecomers had to lie at the edge. Second-class citizens. An old woman claimed she had smelled dry earth the afternoon before. A grumpy uncle grumbled, "This spot should be mine. I peed here to mark it." Someone even stuck up a post, tied rags like a fence, let the wind blow away everything except pride. And then squabbles popped like popcorn in a hot pan. "This is the boundary of my house. You stepped on my ancestral altar. I slept here last night. Just no one saw." A little girl drew a cat in the S and with a stick and said, "This is my cat. It's guarding my land." No one dared enter that area again. A man built a loose line of bricks around his sleeping space. When asked, he said, "I'm building a kitchen, cooking hope." Another dug a shallow trench around his mat and said, "To keep snakes out, not neighbors." One afternoon, two kids faced off like generals, fighting over a dry wooden plank. I found it first, but I lay on it first. They ended up sawing it in half, not to lie on, but to use as pillows. At night, everyone gathered in the middle of the patch, bringing bricks, bamboo sticks, arranging them in circles, like DIY rituals. In the middle of the rough stones, an old man burned fragrant leaves and whispered, "Tomorrow will be dry. It has to be." Another added, "If the sky doesn't dry, at least the ground might." A child drew a house in the dirt, planted a small stick on top as a chimney. When asked, they simply said, "It's my mum's old house, but drier." Though it was funny, everyone understood. In floodland, a patch of dry earth is gold, not just to sleep on, but to imagine something decent again, a roof, a meal, or at the very least, a night without cold feet. A mother brought a charred brick from her old kitchen. She placed it in the center of the field, sprinkled some salt and a mint leaf, not to cook, but as a ritual, as if something familiar under her hand could restart life. An old man pulled from his pocket a faded piece of cloth, embroidered with the word, Ugarit. Beside him, an old woman brought out a seashell, the only thing left after her house was swept away. She pressed it to her palm and said, "I picked it up by the river once. It used to sit on the altar. Now it is the altar." No one added anything. But that night, the shell was passed through 3 others, like a silent vow, salty and unbreakable. No one knew if it was a name, a village, or a promise. But the old man stared at it well past midnight. People began naming corners. "This is Brick Field. where bricks were picked up then put back. And this is around the cracked tree, where a root stuck out like a H and clawing dirt. Another spot was called First Rain Station, though no one knew why. And that's how the new zone was born. No map, no markers, just a rumour, an old item, and a bit of courage to step towards where no footsteps lay. No one had a blueprint. No one had a ruler. And no one had any authority except for 2 wrinkled hands and a dented bucket. But somehow, people began to rebuild, starting with the smallest things. A bamboo stake, not planted to pitch a tent, but to mark, someone is here. A dry banana rope tied around a piece of wood, called a door. A torn cloth hung up as a roof, blocking exactly 3 raindrops, but enough to call a home. You see a child drawing a door frame with dry mud. Another pokes holes in a tin can, threads a string through to make a wind chime. It jingles every time the wind brushes past, as if to say, "Someone lives here, don't forget." The child walks back and forth, lifts their feet, bows their head, as if there's an invisible door that deserves proper manners. An old man taps the ground 3 times before sitting down. Must greet the new home, even if it's just a clump of earth. He laughs, but no one laughs along. 'Cause everyone's doing the same thing. Some people build things no one thought needed building. A mud stage for no performers. A window frame placed in an open patch of dirt. No walls, no roof. But someone sits and looks through it every afternoon, as if on the other side is an old kitchen, or someone who's no longer here. People start collecting bricks, one by one, not stacking them high, not solid, but laid out in U-shapes, L-shapes. Something they say looks like the house I had before the flood came. A mother plants a scallion stalk beside her sleeping spot. Every time the root pushes up from the earth, she gently covers it again with a thin layer of mud, like tucking in a child. That tiny gesture makes others believe the plant is loved. People say scallions won't grow, but every morning she waters it with rice water and offers a smile thin as a wet bamboo curtain. A young man takes 2 wooden planks, nails them into a cross, and plants it into dry ground. Someone asks, "You building a grave?" He shakes his head. "No, it's a nameplate. This is my spot. Knock before you enter." That night, the nameplate glows faintly under the moonlight, not because of ghosts, but because someone stuck a seashell on it, sparkling like a leftover bit of faith. Then came the first real laughter. A child slipped on a dried banana peel. They burst out laughing. Then the whole group followed. Not because of the peel, but because laughter finally didn't fear being swept away. From a corner of the camp came banging sounds. Someone was making something. No one knew what. But it sounded determined. "A stove," he said. "What will you cook with?" "Hope." He smiled. Someone muttered, "That stuff burns long." Kids start playing again. Not pretend games, but real running, jumping, on the damp ground, among pillars whose cement hadn't dried. A little girl sat cross-legged, carefully moulding clay figurines, people, dogs. something that could be either a fish or a boot. Someone asked, "What are you making?" "Rebuilding my old village," she replied. "Why?" "To remember how it used to look before it disappeared." You realize people aren't rebuilding houses, they're rebuilding presence. Every pole, every brick, every unfinished smile. They don't create shelter. They create proof that someone was here, that someone sat, cried, laughed, called out names. Right on this soggy ground no one thought they'd survive a night on. An old man said, staring at a crooked bamboo stake. Before that, he'd tried digging deeper to find his old home's foundation. His hands bled, his feet sank, and he only found a piece of broken pottery. He didn't keep it, just placed it back where he dug, as if returning a fragment of memory. We don't have to cling to pain to remember our homes, he whispered. It's not straight, but it stands. That's enough to call it survival. It's not straight, but it stands. That's enough to call it survival. Names are light, but try throwing one into water. Some names sink, some float, some drift away, and some stay stuck somewhere in the mud. In the camp, people start calling each other differently. No one says Mr. Saw's house or Mrs. Bay who carries water anymore, because there's no house. The buckets are gone. Only left are the one with the surviving cat, the old man who grows chili, or the woman with a laugh like tin bells. Names become tiny memory tags pinned onto people, like little anchors of identity. You hear a boy's sigh, and in the middle of the path, "If you see my sister, curly hair, sad eyes, loves grilled fish, tell her I'm still waiting by the stumpy coconut tree on the bank." No one laughs. No one says, "Sweetheart, your sister is gone." Only elders quietly step back into the shade and exhale like an unfinished prayer. In a corner of the camp, there's a cloth stretched out like a bulletin board. People write names using charcoal, dirt, fingernails, father's name, wife's name, the baby who never got named. Some names are smudged, some are crossed out, some are written over and over again, as if enough times might bring that person back. Some light incense, some glue pebbles, some tie red threads around the letters. No rules, just little ways to say, "I haven't forgotten." One day, a child took a broken tile and carved their mother's name into a tree trunk near the camp. They didn't know how to write, just squiggled lines they thought looked like her handwriting. They stood there all afternoon, then said, "If Mom passes by, she'll know it's me." The wind picked up, leaves rustled, the tree stood still. No one replied, but no one erased the name. Because everyone knew some names, even unreadable, still needed to be present, like a silent proof that someone was once loved. There was a child, around 8, hair like a bird's nest, cracked bare feet, dragging a long stick, walking around the camp. They weren't looking for toys, they were asking for everyone's names. "What's your name?" "Grandpa." They asked an old man hanging up clothes. "What's your name?" "Auntie." They asked a woman rinsing rice with a milk can. "What's your name?" "Uncle." They asked a quiet man tying his torn sandals. Once they'd asked enough, they began to draw, not a geographic map, but a name map etched into the ground with that stick, across dried mud, squiggly, unordered, out of proportion, letters crooked, some names misspelled 3 times. But the child grinned like they'd just finished a treasure map. An adult asked, "Why are you doing this?" The child answered, casually, "So later, if anyone gets lost, they'll remember they were here." And just like that, every scratch, every doodle, every stone placed by a tree became a graveyard with no bodies, a name board with no owners, a museum of those who still remembered others. A woman who lost her child, after crying herself dry, began calling a stranger child by her kid's name. At first, only in her head, then out loud. Then it became a habit. No one corrected her. No one stopped her. No one questioned it. Because that child, though not hers, had never been called by such a gentle voice before. And she, though knowing the truth, still smiled when that name echoed again. The name wasn't wrong, just never right. But right on time. And in the camp's dreams, sometimes you see those names glow, not because some god heard a prayer, but because someone is still calling them in their heart. The Dark Age, around the 12th, 9th centuries BCE. The Dark Age, around the 12th, 9th centuries BCE. Ancient Greece went through several important developmental periods. Among them, the Dark Age, around the 12th, 9th centuries BCE, was a distinct phase. This era is also known as the Early Hellenic period, lasting from approximately the 12th to the 9th century BCE, and following the bustling Mycenaean period. The term dark reflects the scarcity of cultural evidence from this time, making our understanding of ancient Greece during this phase obscure. During the Dark Age, major Mycenaean cities like Pylos and Mycenae were either abandoned or destroyed, leading to the collapse of social and economic systems. The population sharply declined, and the Greeks lived in small groups, primarily as herders. Most of the cultural evidence from this period comes from graves and tombs, usually containing only simple pottery and weapons. One of the most significant events of the Dark Age was the disappearance of the Linear B writing system. Previously, this script had been used by Mycenaean administrators to record the Greek language. The loss of Linear B, along with the collapse of the social structure, ushered in a period of deep cultural decline. However, not all regions experienced such deterioration. For instance, in Euboea, the site of Lefkandi flourished and became an important center thanks to its location between 2 bays and favorable sea trade routes. This indicates that, despite the general collapse, there were still places that continued to develop and sustain commercial and cultural activities. There was a morning no one recorded. No name, no carved letters. No one lived long enough to recount it with words. Only ash and stone, And among those stones was Mycenae, a city that was once the blazing heart of the ancient Greek land. Now, silent as a grave, Mycenae used to be the place where kings wore golden crowns, where warriors hid long spears behind stone walls 10 meters high, where palaces shimmered with torchlight, and where royal footsteps echoed before the sun had risen. From fortress walls to tombs, everything was built with cyclopean blocks, massive stones believed by later people to be lifted only by cyclopes, one-eyed monsters. And yet now, everything lies still. The Lion Gate, once majestic like an eternal symbol, now only bears a silent roar. The stone slabs peel away like the skin of an old beast too exhausted to roar again. No voices, no music, no sound, but the wind slipping through cracks in the wall, like the long sigh of a soul not yet freed. When the sun rises, light falls on broken pottery scattered underfoot, each shard bearing spiral patterns, simple circles, the last remnants of an art that once reached the furthest islands of the Aegean. The storyteller, if anyone remains, is perhaps standing somewhere in that ash, silent, listening to the past echo in their chest, because before Mycenae vanished, it lived like a burning dream, and that is what made its fall so painful. In the 13th century BCE, Mycenae was the greatest power in the Greek land. They ruled the fertile Argolid plain, had a system of palaces, storehouses, ox cart transport chains, and a highly detailed administration recorded in a writing system called Linear B, meaning. Greece had writing before Homer was even born. Linear B wasn't for poetry. It was accounting, clay tablets recording offerings, wheat distribution, numbers of weapons in storage, cows offered to Athena. Mycenae didn't need songs. They ruled by rule books and ledgers, but that structure of power, seemingly solid as limestone, was fragile as thread. The entire system revolved around the central palace. The king, Wanax, gave orders. Nobles oversaw, officials recorded, farmers delivered goods, and slaves kept the wheels turning. When the palace burned, it wasn't just buildings that collapsed, it was society losing its axis. No more common center, no more records, no one dared to decide for themselves. Like cutting the root of an ancient tree, no matter how green the leaves are, they will fall all the same. And like any empire that once stood at its peak, Mycenae fell into a painfully familiar tragedy. No one believed it could disappear. Before the final flames consumed Mycenae, someone tried to tell what once was. In the 19th century, men like Heinrich Schliemann, a German merchant turned archaeologist, dug into the deepest layers of Mycenae, finding a golden mask buried with a corpse. He claimed it was Agamemnon's mask, the legendary king from the Iliad. Though modern scholars refute that, they cannot deny, beneath the earth were dreams left untold. The ancients didn't leave diaries, but they left stones, pottery, and burial items, things that couldn't burn in fire, nor rot in forgetting. No one knows for sure who burned Mycenae. But its fall wasn't just about Mycenae. At the end of the 13th and 12th centuries BCE, the entire eastern Mediterranean shook. Troy was destroyed. The Hittite Empire vanished from Anatolia. Canaanite city-states like Ugarit were burned in nights where no one escaped. Even Egypt, mighty and eternal, recorded brutal invasions from a faceless force they called sea peoples. It was like a wave crashing ashore, sudden, indiscriminate. Archaeologists call this era the Late Bronze Age collapse, a time when the entire network of trade, letters, and alliances of ancient civilizations collapsed like dominoes. Look at the map. You'll see. Mycenae was just one link in a massive chain breaking apart. And Greece, once central in exchange, suddenly fell silent. A silence that lasted 3 centuries. Maybe it was sea invaders. Maybe it was an internal uprising. Maybe it was a chain of disasters, drought, famine, civil war, then fire. But one thing is sure, it was gone. Grain stores burned, palaces fell. Clay tablets with script were fired in flames, then cracked. No one wrote history. No farewells, no funeral rites for a civilization. Only ash. After Mycenae came a void. No heir to the throne. No one continued writing in Linear B. No more palaces were built from Mycenae. A shadow spread, slowly, without warning, swallowing everything once called civilized. And thus, the Dark Age of Greece began. Not dark because there was no light, but because no one wrote the light down for us. When the storyteller closes this first chapter, perhaps you, the one listening, have felt that Mycenae was not just a city. It was a symbol of memory, of pride, of what once was eternal, but now lies in ash. After the fires consumed Mycenae, no one ascended the throne. No new court was established, no list of kings recorded, no insignias, no declarations, no promises of revival, only dispersal. After the centers of power collapsed, people abandoned the cities, once the beating hearts of Mycenaean civilization, and returned to live scattered across hills, small villages, or isolated coastal regions. No more palaces, no more fortresses, no more grand architecture. In archaeology, this is known as the period of no monumental architecture. No more large structures were built. Homes were reduced to simple huts made of rammed earth and scrap wood. Culture shrank accordingly. No more court artisans, no more ritual systems. Only crude pottery and a few handmade beads remained. The population declined drastically. Some areas lost up to 70%. A Greece with no kings, no laws, no epics, no script, yet still quietly surviving. Those who once lived beneath the shadow of citadels now traveled in small groups, hiding in valleys, settling in highlands, or pitching tents beside rivers like people who had never belonged to any civilization at all. And from that, the kings disappeared, not because they died, but because no one needed to record their names anymore. The clay tablets that once bore their names shattered. The tombs once built exclusively for nobles no longer dug. Even elaborate burial rites reduced to a few ceramic jars and hastily scattered ash. The gods, too, changed quietly in form. No longer dwelling in magnificent temples, they retreated to small stone altars by the fields or into damp caves. The people, with no more gold, no more wine for offerings, could only leave a bit of goat milk, a few stalks of wheat, or a whispered prayer. Zeus, if still called by name, was perhaps nothing more than a vague shadow among the mist, and fear. Religion did not disappear, it merely became closer to the earth, no longer a privilege of royalty, but a silent breath from those who still held hope. Their names, once the center of the world, now no one remembered, no one called, not erased, just no longer needed to be written. And you know what? That is the true death of a king. The death of a king may be personal, but the death of a writing system is the death of collective memory. Linear B vanished. No one recorded. No one studied. No one taught. A written language, once the soul of palace power, faded into oblivion without a sound. It would take nearly 400 years for the Greeks to invent a new alphabet, based on the Phoenician script. But what was lost was unrecoverable. Linear B was not the ancestor of modern Greek. It was a broken branch of memory, left behind in the desert of time. Though Greece seemed to fall into silence, there were still places that refused to stay quiet. On the island of Euboea, at a place called Lefkandi, a strange community maintained trade, construction, and even complex burial rites. They buried their dead in long houses with horses, gold, and fine ceramics. No one knows why they survived. But they proved one thing. Even in darkness, some sparks do not go out. Linear B, the oldest known script ever used to write the Greek language, once lived on sun-dried clay tablets, written by palace officials. It was not for poets, it was for granaries, wine, cattle, and slaves. A wedge-shaped script, full of hurried strokes, monotonous yet precise. No literature, no epics, only lists, only inventories, and then it vanished. No one knows why no one learned it anymore. No one passed it on. No schools, no teachers, no one interested in the script that once ran an entire empire. The surviving tablets were preserved because of fire. Without fire, those unbaked clay tablets would have disintegrated over time, softened by water, worn away by wind. It was fire, the very thing that destroyed everything, that accidentally became the last preserver. It fired the clay into hard ceramics. It etched into history what no one intended to keep. A nameless blaze unwittingly preserved the final breath of an administration once coldly efficient. When the palace collapsed, fire baked the clay into pottery. Like a cruel joke of history, only through ruin can something survive. The later Greeks, in the time of Homer, the age of epic poets, had no idea what Linear B was. They invented a new system based on the Phoenician alphabet, one that was easy to learn, easy to read, and marked the beginning of literature. Linear B had no letters like later alphabets. It was a collection of complex signs requiring training and secrecy. That language wasn't open to the public. It served palace administration alone. In contrast, the Phoenician, and later the Greek, alphabet democratized writing. Anyone could learn. Anyone could write poetry, record stories, pass down myths. From the memory of granaries, Greece stepped into the memory of human experience. But that gap 400 years with no script, is why we will never know what the Mycenaeans thought, dreamed, or feared. Linear B was the breath of a bureaucracy. When power collapsed, it stopped breathing too. No noise, no tragedy, just a wisp of memory dissolved in the wind. If Linear B had not disappeared, perhaps Greece would have become a civilization with fewer stories to tell. The epics might never have been born. Myths might have been reduced to ritual commands in an offering list, and Homer, if he existed at all, might have just been a grain accountant. Ironically, the gap without writing became the soil where imagination took root, when no one was writing anymore. Humans began to tell stories again. Between the collapse of Mycenae and the first echoes of Homer's verse lay 3 centuries of silence. No epics, no texts, no dynasties, no one wrote, and no one was written about. The Greeks after Mycenae lived like people with amnesia. No history, because no one held the pen. No future, because the past had slipped through their fingers like sand. We call it the Dark Ages, but for them, it was simply life. Farming, herding goats, avoiding war, lighting fires, and whispering stories around the hearth, stories no one ever wrote down. History didn't disappear. It just moved houses, from clay tablets to oral memory, from priests to grandmothers, from scribes to storytellers. 300 years without names, 300 years that, if not for archaeology, we wouldn't even know existed. A white history, not because it was pure, but because it was blank, not because they didn't exist, but because no one was listening. When archaeologists dug down, they didn't find statues of gods, temples, or libraries, only ash, rubble, a few shards of plain pottery, and silence. They called these layers the silent layers, cultural strata without words, where history was just what hadn't rotted away yet, like the fall of other empires, Akkad in Mesopotamia, or Egypt's intermediate period. Greece, too, had its season of vanishing, without anyone to mourn it. But unlike civilizations that left behind curses, inscriptions, or carved laments, Dark Age Greece left nothing. No one spoke of it. No myths mention it. No heroes emerge from it. Just a blank space, skimmed over by the world. Still, in those little mud brick homes, people place simple altars, a stand in stone, a chipped clay bowl, a few old ashes. No more giant temples, but the faith remained, trimmed down, mute yet persistent. Zeus, Athena, Apollo. If their names were still uttered, it was likely through a child's mouth, through a mother's lullaby, not chiseled into marble. The gods didn't leave. They simply shrank, living in the fear and hope of ordinary people. Religion, like a small flame in the night, was kept alive, not through doctrine, but through habit, whispers, and repeated gestures. You can't write history with mud, but you can read it through clay. For 3 centuries, without writing, the only remnants of Greek life were broken pots. No steles, no tombs, no engraved heroics. Just shards of bowls, cracked jars, clay vessels. but they became the last surviving library of an entire age. The Greeks of the Dark Age didn't record, but they still cooked, carried water, worshipped gods, and buried their dead, all in pottery. And pottery, unlike flesh, cloth, or parchment, doesn't rot. Modern archaeologists divide entire epochs just by the drawings on pots, from simple spiral motifs, proto-geometric, to concentric circles, to sharp, intricate patterns, geometric style. The stages gradually reassemble life, aesthetics, and abstract thinking. Pottery wasn't just utility, it was a memory map, the first sign that people were regaining a sense of control. And just like language, before it became text, the eye and hand told the stories of the age. Each generation of potters in the Dark Age left behind different marks. First, repeating circles, like breathing, or swirling valley winds. Then zigzags, chi shapes, like the flicker of unsettled minds. Finally, chariots, human figures, horses, signals of myth and identity returning. No words, no books. Just through a single water jar, people stitched back the soul of their culture. The large clay urns used for burial were the only proof that the dead were still honored. Some pots depicted funerals, some chariots saying goodbye to warriors. Some bore only slashes, like a grief too wordless to name. Even without poetry, the Greeks pressed their spirits into clay. Every pot was a farewell that never spoke aloud. Before the alphabet existed, Greeks painted their emotions onto pottery. Each motif, each ring, each incision meant something. Today's archaeologists can read faith, fear, isolation, and the longing for order. It wasn't pottery anymore. It was a diary made by hand. It was how people etched themselves back into existence when there was nothing left to write with, and no one left to write for. Amid the grey map of Greece, covered with ashes and silence, Lefkandi, a tiny name on the island of Euboea, suddenly appears like a strange glowing dot. While most other regions fell into desolation, Lefkandi continued to build, bury, trade, and remember. Not remembering through writing, but through action, through architecture, funerals, and offerings to the dead. Here, archaeologists discovered a long house stretching up to 50 meters, a rare structure in the Dark Age. Inside, a pair of skeletons, one male and one female, buried with horses, weapons, exquisite pottery, and gold imported from the East. No one knows who they were. There's no inscription, no medals, only solemn silence. But that silence speaks volumes. That social rank still mattered here. That someone was honored enough to be buried with horses. That trade network still reached far enough to bring gold from the Levant. Lefkandi didn't build palaces, they built memory. Throughout those centuries of collapse, Lefkandi became living proof that, even when the light of civilization dims, not every place agrees to go dark. In Lefkandi, people didn't just live, they remembered. They didn't just farm, they held on to dignity. They didn't just survive, they protected what once made humans human. Lefkandi wasn't a myth. It was a big enough exception to challenge the very concept of the Dark Age. And in every age of collapse, there's always a place, like Lefkandi, that proves civilization doesn't disappear, it just goes to sleep for a while. The long house at Lefkandi is called a Haroon, a rare type of hero's tomb, serving both as a burial site and a living monument. This architecture wasn't a coincidence. It showed that the Lefkandi community still maintained ritual consciousness, an unimaginable feat in an era where most were just trying to survive. They didn't build palaces, but they erected a structure not to live in, but to remember someone or something that rose above daily life. Some scholars believe this is the earliest sign of belief in mythic heroes, a new kind of religion, somewhere between faith and folklore, paving the way for later Greek mythology. But what surprised archaeologists most was the origin of the grave goods, beads from the Near East, gold possibly from the Levant, pottery, some of foreign origin. This proves that Lefkandi didn't just survive, it kept trading, while other places withdrew and closed off. Lefkandi stayed open to the outside world. They weren't isolated. They were a functioning link in the network that once spanned the Mediterranean. And because of that, they became a bridge between two ages, from the fallen Mycenaean civilization to the dawning age of ancient Greece. Compared to other sites of the same time, like Athens, Argos, or Thessaly, Lefkandi truly stands out as an extraordinary light. Athens during this period left virtually no significant architecture, no elite tombs, no imported artifacts. Argos shrank, as if recovering from a deep shock. Thessaly, the fertile northern Elle, and sank into near archaeological silence. Only Lefkandi, where memory refused to die. This led scholars to ask, perhaps the Dark Age wasn't equally dark everywhere. Perhaps some communities didn't just survive, but actively remembered and deliberately rebuilt a world that was lost. And Lefkandi, with all the silence it left behind, became a wordless declaration that history isn't only written with letters, it's preserved through the choices of a community. When looking at the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization and the entire Eastern Mediterranean, people often tend to search for a single cause: war, climate change, internal unrest, plague, or nameless invaders from the sea. But the truth is that there wasn't one cause. Everything collapsed, not from a single blow, but from 1,000 tiny cracks left unhealed. Around the late 13th century BCE, the dense trade network across the eastern Mediterranean began to stretch to its breaking point. Fertile plains faced drought. Crop failures dragged on for years. Populations grew, but food supplies couldn't keep up. City-states depended on each other. When one broke, the whole network trembled. Then city-states rebelled. Farmers revolted. Soldiers abandoned the court to return home, or became pirates, mercenaries. Even Egypt, the strongest at the time, had to carve on temple walls the maddened battles against a nameless, flagless force, the Sea Peoples. Mycenae, Troy, Hattusa, all collapsed almost at once. It wasn't an explosion, it was a silent landslide. No sword ever killed as many as too much sun. Around 1200 BCE, pollen and sediment samples show the Aegean, and Near East went through years of severe drought, devastating crops and pushing imperial supply systems into crisis. Wheat didn't grow, cattle died, granaries emptied. And when people revolted, it wasn't because they hated the king. It was because they were hungry. Many archaeological sites show granaries looted before palaces, as if the only thing worth saving was grain. It's like a machine. When the vital gear wears out, the system doesn't explode, but starts breaking down from within. History doesn't collapse because of one reason. It collapses because there's no reason strong enough left to hold it up. They came from the sea. No one knows who they were. Just that after them came fire. Records from Egypt under Ramses III describe a massive invading force, men, women, children, and warriors, arriving on ships with no flags, no messengers, no reason. The Egyptians called them sea peoples, those who came from the sea. They didn't just attack Egypt, but swept through Anatolia, Canaan, Cyprus, and Greece. Many scholars believe part of the scattered Mycenaean population, or former unemployed warriors, became a branch of this force, the storm every civilization feared. They built nothing, they passed through, and everything behind them burned. Not an army, but an armed migration, both victims and bringers of chaos. And so, no one knows where they came from. And no one knows if they ever really disappeared. Sometimes, empires don't get defeated, they get abandoned. There's no clear evidence of foreign armies invading the heart of Mycenae, but there is evidence that the people inside burned it when crops fail, when storehouses empty, when the king has nothing left to give. Loyalty becomes a luxury. Many archaeological traces show buildings burned, but no enemy corpses. Lower classes vanish from records. Palaces left unrepaired after fires, as if no one wanted to keep them anymore. Some scholars call this the civilization strike, when those who once served the system decided not to serve anymore. And the sad truth is, when belief collapses first, even walls can't save anyone. No more writing, no more records, no more linear B characters that once described wheat, cattle, and offerings. After the collapse, the Greeks had nothing to read and nothing to write, but they still told stories. They told them around the fire, told them at funerals, told them by tapping rhythms on clay jars, told them through tone. When words had been blown away by the wind, the voice became the last thread holding onto history. There were boys who grew up never knowing who ruled Mycenae. But they knew. Achilles was fast. Didn't know where Troy was on a map, but knew the Queen of Sparta was taken. From the 12th to the 9th century BCE, Greece lived through a letterless era, but names still passed from mouth to mouth. Odysseus, Helen, Hector, Perseus, Agamemnon. No one remembered exactly, but everyone remembered something. Legend became a replica of collective memory, distorted, embellished, but enough to keep the fire burning. And from those vague, scattered tales, eventually came the Homeric epics, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. Perhaps Homer didn't invent. He merely wrote down what others had told 1,000 times. And so, history was not forgotten. It merely slept in the voice of a blind old woman. The bards who held memory, they didn't write books, they were walking books. In the darkness of a letterless age, a special group of people preserved memory from fading. The bards, the wandering storytellers. They didn't stay in one place. They traveled from village to village, carrying stories, melodies, and history within their minds. No paper, no ink, but they memorized thousands of lines, with rhythms precise down to the breath. People didn't listen to learn, they listened to remember. To pass it on. A child would hear the story of Achilles over and over, then retell it to their younger sibling the following year. And so, history flowed through generations without needing a single written word. These bards were the bridge between the world that had collapsed and the world of ancient Greece slowly forming from those very stories. A story retold isn't meant to preserve accuracy, it's meant to preserve existence. In communities with no writing system, memory didn't belong to one person, it belonged to everyone. Each person held a piece. The elders remembered the beginning. The youth remembered the action. The children remembered the songs. But when they all gathered together, the story came alive. Storytelling became a communal ritual. One person told, one listened, one kept rhythm, one repeated, one added. No one had the right to say, "This story is wrong." Because it wasn't checked by a manuscript, it was checked by repetition across centuries. A story, then, didn't need to be exact in every word. It only needed to keep its spirit. And when thousands remembered the same spirit, that was history. When they couldn't write with letters, they drew. When they couldn't carve in stone, they spoke aloud. In the darkness of history, where writing had disappeared, the Greeks still left traces of memory through pottery. Jars, plates, urns, they weren't just containers. They became screens of memory. On them, people painted riders, sacrificial rites, funerals, warriors with round shields and long spears, each stroke an attempt to remember through image. Even without clearly writing Achilles, a lone warrior fighting a crowd was enough for everyone to understand. Even without saying "this is Odysseus," a blind man rowing through wild waves would feel familiar to the viewer. Perhaps it was legend told through terracotta. Perhaps it was history without letters. After 3 centuries of only oral storytelling, Greece began to write again. Not to rewrite the past, but to rewrite itself. Around the 9th, 8th century BCE, the Greeks came into contact with the Phoenicians, a seafaring trading people living along the eastern Mediterranean coast. From them, the Greeks didn't just learn how to build better ships, they also learned the alphabet. And for the first time in history, the Greeks had a writing system that was easy to learn, easy to remember, and able to record speech. No more symbols like linear B reserved for the elite. Now, everyone could learn to read. Writing is light, but it doesn't shine on the past. It shines on the future. With writing came the rise of city-states, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, each with its own identity, its own way of storytelling. The Greeks began to record city-state laws, trade agreements, hymns to the gods, and later, historical chronicles. With writing, memory was no longer bound to human recollection, and because of that, culture could evolve beyond a single generation. The Greeks did something strange. They wrote down the old, but didn't erase the old ways of telling. Homer, Hesiod, Pindar. The pioneers of Greek literature were both poets and scribes for the collective memory. From now on, stories would no longer be vague. They could be copied, studied, debated. And so, from small cities, from looping characters, from a borrowed alphabet, ancient Greece began to enter a time no longer dark. From a system of remembering to a civilization of recording, the new alphabet wasn't just a tool. It was a gateway to a radical change in thinking. Unlike Linear B, complex, hard to learn, and used only by palace scribes, the Greek alphabet had vowels that might sound small, but with vowels, speech could be captured almost exactly, no longer a code for elites, but writing for everyone, from merchants to wandering poets. The Phoenicians only used writing to log invoices. The Greeks used it for poetry. A farmer could carve the first letter of his son's name onto a broken shard of pottery, not because someone told him to, but because he could. And just like that, writing went from a royal privilege to the right of everyone to retell. No more kings, only laws. When writing returned, it wasn't just a tool for stories, it became the foundation for a new society. In Mycenae, power had belonged to palaces, but now, in Athens, Sparta, or Corinth, power came from laws written down. Citizens no longer had to trust the memory of officials. They could read the law, debate, record. If the king dies, the law dies too. But if the law is written, it outlives dynasties. And thanks to writing, the concept of the citizen began to form. A person with the right to know. A person with the right to argue. A person responsible for the community, not by blood, but by the words carved in stone. A civilization begins with bricks, but a city-state society begins with a posted notice. Memory is soil. Literature is the seed. When writing returned, the Greeks didn't start with new things. They began with old stories. Stories of a 10-year war. Stories of a man wandering 10 years after that. Stories of jealous, flawed gods who felt very human. Odysseus may not be real, but his longing for home is. Homer, maybe one person, maybe many, wrote down the Iliad and the Odyssey, using the materials heard over generations. And when mythology was written down, it no longer drifted through memory. It became a pillar of culture. From now on, people didn't just tell to remember. They learned to understand, to reflect, to rewrite, to critique. From a night of storytelling by the fire to hand-copied books in the library of Alexandria. Greek myths didn't die when written. They lived longer because they had form. And thus, literary history began with memory. There was no beating drum, no forest of spears raised high, no king proclaiming, "The Dark Age is over." But on one morning, in the middle of the 8th century BCE, when a child opened their eyes and could learn to read their name from a wooden board in the market, that was the dawn. The Dark Age didn't end with a victorious battle. It ended in silence. In the way the Greeks began again from the smallest things. A clay-roofed house, a shard of pottery with letters etched on it, a village fair echoing with mythic songs, from small villages like Lefkandi, from bards passing stories mouth to mouth, from the borrowed alphabet of the Phoenicians. Ancient Greece slowly revived, and the end of the Dark Age was the beginning of memory that could be read. Nothing is truly lost if it's still told. The Greeks did not fully remember what was lost in those 3 silent centuries, but they remembered by rewriting poetry, laws, accounts, architecture, festivals. And from those fragmented memories, they created something bigger, identity. From a L and scorched and ruined, the Greeks built something that had never existed. A world without an all-powerful king, where memory did not depend on a bloodline, but was printed on pottery, carved on stone, read by children, and debated by entire cities. Memory may fade, but the promise of remembering is never giving up. And so, when the light returned not only through fire, but through each written word, Greece stepped out of the long night, not to return to the past, but to write forward a future where everyone had the right to tell history